All right, another edition of Riding Home. The College Football Playoff Committee has released rankings. Kirby Smart and company are getting ready for the Kentucky Wildcats. Ryan, comments from let's start with where the Dogs are getting ready for what's going to be a very very cold game.
Yeah, it's going to be cold. They had a cold game last week. This one will be colder, and that
Wonderful.
affects us people here too in some ways. But physicality has kind of been the word this week used by the players and Kirby. That Kentucky's a physical team. Kirby used the word I can't remember the exact sentence he had, but he used the word bloodbath to describe how
Yeah,
these
he did.
Kentucky games have been. So you know, and it's true. Kentucky is a physical team. They've been kind of a power. I would consider them kind of. I mean, they don't just hand the ball off every play, but they do have a power run game. They have a power run back in Chris
Rodriguez.
Rodriguez. He's not your guy that you're throwing a bunch of screens to. He's a guy that can knock you down between the tackles. Will Levis is obviously a really physical quarterback. Part of the reason why he's gotten um, NFL attention. Kirby praised his arm earlier this week, I believe on Monday, that he had a bazooka of an arm, which he does have a cannon, but it's a matter of can you play 4 quarters against Georgia and make the right decisions and limit your mistakes? Can he do that against Georgia? I would say probably not enough to win them the game. But Kentucky didn't play poorly against Georgia last year when they came to Athens. I actually was a little impressed
No.
with the fight they put up.
Yeah.
It was one of those games where Georgia didn't really just run away with it. You felt like they were in control, but Georgia didn't just run away with it really quickly. Um, but it's going to be, that's not an easy environment. They stress over and over and over again how hard it is to play on the road.
It's
And
tough.
there's a lot of little factors, the weather, it being on the road, you're late in the season. You know, is this Georgia team, will they get complacent? That's something Kirby talks about since, you know, the players are aware. They look at the stuff that the media says. They look at the rankings. They know that they, probably have a margin of victory of one loss right now. You can't think that way.
Uh-oh, Ryan froze.
I'll
Let me
hear
just.
you.
Oh,
I
now he's
think
back.
generally
Okay.
speaking, the team is in a pretty good spot health wise.
You froze for me. I don't know if you froze for everyone else, but here's what Kirby said. He said, "It's been a bloodbath, man. Like the game last year was so physical, so tough, rugged, and they ran a lot of physical runs. We like to run a lot of physical runs, and you just end up clanging against one another. When you come out of the game, you're really sore." He went on to say, "Our guys respect Kentucky. I respect Coach Stoops, and what they did last week has nothing to do with what they'll do this week. Of course, they lost to Vanderbilt, as Ryan knows." That's not, they're not just saying that. They do respect Kentucky. I think that they feel like Kentucky plays a lot of the same way that they do. Kentucky's not going to win this game. It's going to be really hard for them to do that, at least. And I think the one thing I would add about going up to Commonwealth, um, that this is not a night game is really good for Georgia on a couple levels. That's when Georgia's had plenty of trouble is night games at Commonwealth. And I do think the weather is going to be problematic. I have our hand warmers for the week, plural.
I
Ryan,
ordered I ordered one as well, so there's
did you?
another.
Okay, so you have.
I think I ordered that exact one
I have
actually.
my list. I have gloves on here. Um, but
Well, the traditional hand warmers were not functioning
no, they're
properly at
garbage.
start.
They're just not good. And
Kirby really wants to talk.
yeah, he's interested today. I cannot talk because I'm on the phone, Kirby. Keeps blowing me up, man. It's like my freshman college girlfriend. That's no good. Like they just won't leave you alone. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've been
Yeah,
there.
Ryan knows what I'm talking about. Um, I like. I think Georgia in this case is in a situation where they need to go up there and perform. The weather is going to be problematic for Stetson and Levis both. Everybody else, it really won't be a problem. But I do think that going up there, we can't ignore the reality, Ryan, that Vanderbilt beat Kentucky. But the way they beat them with the run game, it's going to be really tough for Kentucky to stop the run when they didn't stop the run against Vanderbilt.
No, because you take a Vanderbilt team that was able to go in there and do that. Well, Vanderbilt was absolutely demolished in the last 2 years, and usually just gets absolutely bashed by Georgia. They got 55-0 this year. They got 62-0 last year. Georgia has had games where they ran the ball really well, and they've had games where they didn't run the ball really well. Last week may have been, in my opinion, last week was probably their worst game on the ground all year long. Just from what I can remember, the stats are skewed by two really big runs.
Those count.
But they count. But I'm talking about like through the longevity of the game, were you able to be effective on the ground? I thought that Georgia was the least effective on the ground last week. That doesn't mean it's going to happen 2 weeks in a row, and you're going to have to get these backs. Something that my dad points out a lot,
Uh,
and he's been pointing out a lot over the last like I guess since Chubb was the kind of the starter, Chubb and Michelle. When they get these backs fed, the rotation. I mean, I don't know because I'm not a running back coach and I'm not enough as a coordinator, but the rotation, like rotating these backs every couple plays, doesn't keep them in a rhythm. Who's going to be a guy that you maybe have a drive where you just feed them? Is it going to be Dejan Edwards? Is it going to be Branson Robinson? They've had a lot of success over the last 8 or 9 years when they get a guy hot and just give the ball to the hot hands. That's not really something you've seen with this Georgia team, and not so much last year either, because they rotate them so much that you don't really see one back just going off. Now, there's been a couple games. Dejan Edwards had, he ran the ball a lot against Florida. Branson Robinson had a big second half against Auburn. So they have that capability. And I kind of agree. You got to get one or two of those guys really going and make it difficult for the Kentucky defense to keep up.
all right, so you've made me kind of wonder. That was the third lowest. I'm sorry, fourth lowest margin running yardage that Georgia's had this season. Actually, it might be not even that low, Ryan. But again, I always preface the Samford game was a running clock in the fourth quarter. They had 132 against Oregon, 127 against Samford. Against the Chickens, they were at 208, 257 against Kent State, 169 against Mizzou, 292 against Auburn, 192 against Vandy. Florida gave up 239 yards rushing. Tennessee at 130, and then last week against State 179. The thing that jumps out though, man, is the way that Kentucky plays. They want to run the ball. This is what Georgia's allowed in the run game. This is pretty much amazing, man. This is the opponent rushing for this season so far, Ryan. Oregon 140, Samford 19, 92 for Carolina, 93 for Kent State, 102 for Mizzou, 92 for Auburn, 45 for Vandy, 100 for the Gators, 94 for Tennessee, 47 for State. No one's gone over 140 yards against Georgia. Kentucky is going to get killed. I mean, I just
Yeah.
don't see. I mean, outside of turnovers, which if you look at the statistics here, I mean, you had a turnover game against Kent State. You had a -2 against Mizzou, -3 against Florida, and -2 against State. So, and still won those games going away, with the exception of the Missouri game.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's two really big reasons why teams struggle to run against Georgia. One being that defense is very fast and very strong. It's just tough to run on them in general. And then two, you get behind, you start throwing the ball maybe a little bit more than you would in your normal game plan, and that's usually the
Yes.
case when you're playing this Georgia team is you're playing from behind. So you see people, they're attempting a lot more passes than maybe they would in a game that's a lot closer. So, but running the ball on this Georgia team in the first place is not an easy thing. And last year, their run defense was a little bit, they had a lot. Their front seven was just beefier, right?
Yes.
Uh, Guys like
Yes.
Jordan Davis, Devonta Wyatt. Now, I'm not saying this front seven isn't beefy because they definitely have their fair share of some big guys that are really good at football. But last year's front seven swallowed you up a little bit more. This one still does, maybe not as effectively. And maybe we should just not even talk about last year's front seven. That's my fault for bringing that up. I know the comparisons are probably not the best thing. It's tough, man, when you got guys like Jalen Carter, when you go back to the next unit with those
Let, let,
linebackers, they
let,
just fly around, man. Smile Mondon and Jamon Dumas Johnson are almost always where the ball is.
you talked about this in the car the other day. I did want to ask
Okay.
from up top, because I noticed him on the field. How much has Jalen mattered for Georgia this when as coming back?
Yeah, since he came back, it makes a big difference, man. And I always knew that it made a big difference, but I think it's been the most evident the last 3 weeks throughout his college career. One,
Okay,
because he's playing way more snaps than he ever has. I've been impressed. I've honestly been impressed with his conditioning because I know that's something Kirby seemed to be pretty concerned about when I think it was like in August or July, I guess an August press conference when Jalen Carter was a hot topic. Can he be conditioned? Can he do what we ask him to do at a high level on more plays this season? And the answer has been yes. So since he's come back against Florida, he was weaved in, and you could tell there was a difference. I believe he played on mostly just second and third down, mostly just third down. And then you get him against Tennessee and Mississippi State.
right.
He's in the backfield a lot. He is in the backfield quickly. He is fast. He is strong. You just, these offensive guards, even these like 4 or 5 star offensive guards that they go up against in SEC, they just can't one on one with him. And he gets back there, whether he gets to the quarterback or not, it creates a little bit more chaos in the backfield. And he does have a couple sacks last couple weeks. He had 2 forced fumbles, one against Hooker in the end zone and the other against the running back. He's just a very special player, and it was very noticeable. Especially, I had a pretty good angle on it too, and I noticed like a lot of from that angle where I was watching, there were a lot of plays where I'm watching Jalen Carter from behind a little bit, and it's just he just gets back there so fast. You've seen the clips, the Oregon play. I mean, he just one armed the dude to the ground. I mean, he's an elite NFL prospect, and when you
Right.
have that on your line, it's really tough for offensive linemen to deal with, and it creates a problem for the quarterback. You cannot tell me that Jalen Carter's presence did not make things difficult for Hendon Hooker and Will Rogers. That's it. It's very impressive. The last 2 weeks have been in his career to me the most notable noticeable of how talented he is.
I think when you look ahead to Michigan, Ohio State, I think that's the challenge. Well, all of this is the challenge. You know, I mean, Ohio State's gotten better on defense. Michigan has been a solid team. Um, and I'm saying this like this isn't a question that I'm asking ignorantly. I don't know the answer. I'm not trying to be funny here. I mean, do Ohio State and Michigan have the players on the offensive line to handle Jalen Carter? Do they? Um, he really is trouble, and you know when you start talking about the mistakes that the offense makes or whatever, Georgia's defense gives you a margin of error. Think about that Missouri game, man. I mean, I think that's probably the worst game they're going to play this season. It's what it looks like to me, at least. Um, and maybe the last 2 years. And it's a little bit like watching the political results. Like somebody can get a lead, but
Mhm.
when you know that metropolitan areas are still coming in, like so Mizzou got that lead, and Georgia's defense sat on them and like, nope, you're going to have to try to kick 50-yard field goals, and they did. I mean, what happens if Missouri doesn't kick those 50-yard field goals? That game is not a game that people really talk about. So I think they're really in good position here. I think to some degree, and maybe you have a comment on this, that they don't have to play the boogeyman of Alabama anytime soon. It's the same thing, but I think they would beat Alabama. Right now, they look like the best team in college football, and I'm not saying that on the college football playoff show, like just for a soundbite. I'm not saying that because of X, Y, or Z. I want to watch Ohio State and Michigan more, but the return of Jalen Carter makes Georgia's defense that much more complicated to deal with. And I think what happened with Tennessee was one thing that sort of spotlighted, God, this guy's a real problem all the time, you know?
Yeah, because even just his presence on the line is felt because he does get doubled.
He gets doubled.
That definitely happens, and that creates space for other guys to fly in there,
The the
and
the
and
one
those guys are
thing,
no slouch.
no, they're not. Now they don't have Nolan in the front
Yes,
to take advantage of that, or say, last year they had Adam Anderson for half the season. They don't have someone who could. I mean, a double, usually the outside guy's not taking advantage of that necessarily. It's someone else on the inside. We haven't necessarily. Well, I mean, Zion Logue, I think is. I think. I mean, I don't think he's had a bad year. I don't know. I thought he would flash a little more than he has, but he's certainly not had a bad year. And then Stackhouse, Brinson, uh,
they've all had
they've
their
all had.
moments,
They
but it
all
hasn't
have
been
had their moments.
super consistent from each of them.
Well, we don't. It may be. I'm not
Yeah,
sure. I know enough to say that it's not been
yeah, no,
consistent
I
or it
agree.
has been. I don't know, but I know that they have had their flashes. Stackhouse has. Brinson has. Logue has been very steady. Bill Norton had big plays
He
against
did.
Mizzou. Was it Mizzou?
The freshman Bear Alexander has made plays
There
when
for
he's gotten the
sure.
chance.
Jefferson is the one I think right now you keep a watch on. He started to really get rolling. I noticed him a lot against Mississippi State. And what separated Clemson in the mid 2010s, is that what we're calling it?
Yeah, that
Um,
defensive line, man.
it was their defensive line. Without them, they don't win the national championship in 16. Okay, talk about Deshaun all you want to, but what slowed everybody down was that D line. Georgia didn't have that. Guess who's got it now? And I think that this is the reason why I'm not certain that Georgia wins it all, but I'm saying they should be the favorite right now. I mean, uh, that's all I have to say. I mean, LSU is going to have a hard time beating these guys. Tennessee can beat them. Ohio State can beat them. Michigan can beat them. I'm unconvinced TCU can, but I think it's Michigan, Ohio State, Tennessee. After that, you want to help me here, SC?
Well, here's what I'll say. My list is a little shorter than that.
Oh, you're gonna go full on. Do you want me to grab you a pom pom real quick?
I mean, we're not playing cheerleader here. We're speaking truths,
Oh,
Dean.
now we're speaking
We're
truths.
speaking
Okay,
truths.
gotcha. I gotcha.
From what I've
Are
witnessed,
you
I
talking?
have
So
a
let me
hard time. I have a
Tech,
hard.
Kentucky.
No, 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 no.
Oh, okay.
You saying you were listing some of those top teams? I think that list is more so just Ohio State and Tennessee.
Oh, you don't buy
Uh,
Michigan?
I don't buy Michigan. I just don't think Michigan would be able to score enough on this Georgia team. I don't think their offense is dynamic enough, and it's something we saw it last year. It's not too different this year, and I think they don't have that stud on the who was kind of a mute point in that Orange Bowl and
All
Aiden
right, so
Hutchinson,
let's
but they don't
talk
have that stud.
about Tennessee then. Let's talk
Well,
about
Tennessee can
Tennessee.
just score in a hurry, and I think it's tough to win a rematch, but
Right.
in a rematch, I think it'd be a higher scoring game in a neutral site.
Okay.
Obviously, you wouldn't have that home crowd. If it's in Atlanta, I would assume there'd be more Georgia fans if
There
that
would be
happens.
for sure.
So, um, but
I,
we just know how quick they can score. I mean, they put up 60 points twice this year. Now, again, those teams were not great. Missouri was one of them, who has a solid defense, and they were putting up some style points this past weekend.
yeah,
But when you can score that many points that consistently, when you can score 40, 50 points pretty consistently, which they've done,
yeah.
you have a really good chance to win games. Ohio State on offense, they just have a lot of guys that are going to
They
play at
do.
the next level
Yeah.
and are really talented, including their quarterback, who's gonna have an opportunity to play at the next level. They can score. They can outscore any team. Now, I think Georgia has the capability to outscore any team, and some of that's game script, which is why they don't put up 50 a game. But I have a hard time seeing Michigan or and I have a really hard time seeing USC or TCU if it ends up being one of those teams beat this Georgia team because I just don't think they're going to be able to score enough and their defenses aren't good enough to stop Georgia from getting the points that they need, whatever that number ends up being.
I'm doing my best not to cut you off. I love to cut you off, though. I have these moments in my brain where I just want to say something.
Yeah. No, you're good. It's just
And then I don't, and then I don't say. That's why you see people write stuff down. I was talking with someone. I don't know that I would call them an insider at Tennessee, but their whole point was with Georgia that Tennessee had not seen the offensive or defensive line like that yet, and they included Alabama in that. So that was that wouldn't change for Tennessee, Georgia. I do think Tennessee can beat Georgia. I think it'd be challenging though. I mean, the crowd mattered for sure, but the I mean, what mattered the most was that Georgia was the better team. I mean, that's what it seemed like to me. I think for me, if I'm going to be an Ohio State hater, which I don't, I'm not, I don't really care. I think the concerning thing to me for Ohio State was when they really needed to run the ball against Northwestern, they did not do a good job of it. And I've seen Ohio State some. They're good. It's Georgia and them are probably the best two teams in the country. I don't know. I think the other issue for Ohio State is, that their matchup with Michigan is like not an ideal situation. I mean, when you would play sports, if you were playing somebody that played like you'd know how to deal with them. That's not what Ohio State is getting into with Michigan. I mean, Michigan wants to play in a phone booth, and Ohio State's trying to play on I-285. You know what I mean? So it's they're different styles. It makes fights, no question, but I would be concerned about that game if I were Ohio State. I think that you got to stop people. Ohio State's defense is better than it was, no doubt. But if you can't run, as we saw last week with Mississippi State, a poor man's Ohio State, if you can't run, it becomes exceedingly difficult to win games, Ryan. When you can take, let me just say this one thing, it's very simple. When you can take the ball and literally hand it to another person, there's less problem. You're always going to be able to hand it to that person. When you literally take a ball and put it through the air towards another person, there's a lot more involved in that, and it makes it complicated. That's what I'd be worried about if I were Ohio State.
yeah, we saw Tennessee come to Athens and wasn't super effective on the ground. You're relying on Hendon Hooker, and it just didn't work. Plain and simple, it just didn't work well enough. It didn't really work that well. Another note on Ohio State, that running back room is really banged up.
I know. I
Their
know.
starter did not play last week. I don't know what his status is moving forward. And then the backup who started last week got hurt, and that looked to be somewhat significant. I don't know the details of their injuries, but their top two guys in that running back room are not healthy. So that does not help their case, particularly in a game like Michigan, where you don't want to have to drop back 50 or 60 times to beat a
No.
team. Usually, when
No.
you're dropping back that many times, it's because you're losing. So that could end up being an issue for Ohio State. They do have a talented running back room. If those guys are healthy, that definitely limits one dimension of football for them. And being a one-dimensional team just doesn't usually work. There's not a lot of championship teams that were extremely one-dimensional. You can say LSU was a really pass happy team, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire was a really good running back that they trusted. Um, Alabama, Najee Harris, that was a pass happy team, right? With Devontae Smith being the Heisman winner, but they had Najee Harris, who they trusted. So it doesn't always work out that way, and that could be an issue for Ohio State against Michigan. That game is in Columbus this time.
Correct. And
Yeah,
I said Northwestern. I meant to say Penn State. I think it was. They only went for 66 yards against Iowa. They went for 98 yards against Penn State rushing. Um, it was Stroud that had such a hard time. I misspoke earlier. He had 76 yards passing. They only had 273 yards rushing. If this statistics here are correct, the opponents, Ohio State's been better against the run, man. I mean, they only allowed 76 to Notre Dame. They gave up 192 to Wisconsin. 124 to Toledo. Michigan State only had 7. Iowa had 77. Penn State had 111. Northwestern had 206, and Indiana had 150, but that was a total blowout. But the ones that stand out there are Wisconsin and Northwestern. You never want to take any one game and kind of say, hey, this is what it is. But I just remember, they didn't really get the ball rolling the way they wanted to against Northwestern, and it was because they could not run effectively the way they wanted to. If my math is right here, uh, they ran. I mean, it's not the end of the world, obviously, to go and struggle on the road, but when you can't throw it, um, that's problematic. And when you can't do either, you have to be able to turn to the other. Against Indiana, they had almost 700 yards of offense, but I mean, it's crazy. But against, one of the better defenses in that league, Iowa, they didn't even get 100 yards rushing. I mean, they had 66. So it helps to have a 300-yard performance from Stroud. But um, and for Georgia, to me, if they're going to turn it over, that's going to be problematic for them. But then again, anybody that turns it over is in trouble, and that's just what it is. Anyway, I kind of talked a lot about Ohio State, which is unnecessary, but I I I don't. Kentucky's going to have a hard time with this game. That's what I think.
Yeah, it's just not that Georgia's a good matchup for anybody, but I think it's a really bad matchup for this
Yes,
Kentucky team who has underperformed their expectations this year.
no
Not that their
question.
expectations were set at the playoff, but they've underperformed. And if you're ranked at home losing to Vanderbilt, that's just not good, man.
No, that can't
No hate,
happen.
no hate for Vanderbilt, but it's just not a good football program. And you allow that to happen. Um, I can't imagine that that's good for at all for morale trying to get up to play the number one team in the country just 7 days later. That can't be good for the mental side of it. It's going to be a really tough one for Kentucky because of the weather and it being on the road. I don't necessarily think Georgia is going to put up 40 or 50 points. They're capable of it. I don't know if it'll happen.
I
This
wonder if
could
they're
be a
just
lower
gonna.
scoring game. That's
I
what I'm
just
thinking. And they might just try to keep it on the ground.
well, I think they're going. I think they are going to. I think they're going to try to run, 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 run. I don't know why you wouldn't want. They try to do that against Kentucky in 2000, and excuse me, 2020. They try to do it in 21. I mean, I very, very specifically remember. It's in
I
the
think
book.
Swift had a big game against them in 18.
They just feel like they have the guys that can can punch you constantly, and how many punches can Kentucky survive? And I don't know the answer to that. This is one of the Kentucky pages. This picture is that's one of my favorites with Lewis Seen and Andrew Smart just chilling. But it's going to be tough for Kentucky. I think that the strange thing, Ryan, as we get off here is a year ago this game was watched by 6 million people on CBS. This was a top 10 fight. Kentucky was 11 and Georgia was 2. And now you're going to see a Kentucky team that's going to host Georgia, number one team in the country, and Kentucky's just holding on. It's going to be hard for the Wildcats. I don't know. Final
Yeah,
thought?
it's gonna be a really tough game for them. I just any team can beat any team, but I don't think that this particular Kentucky team is going to give Georgia too many issues. It's going to be a tough one for them.
All right. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the website.